Jesus had a remarkable conversation with a woman at a well. And that conversation tells us a lot about what he expects from us today. And then subsequently, his disciples showed up and he made some comments to them. Let's listen to what Jesus said. Hello, I'm Ps Bola, Ogedengbe, and this is Passion for God. Once again, it's a joy to be with you. And today I'm going to be responding to some comments that people make and questions that they ask about reaching souls, winning souls, reaching the lost, and evangelism in general. And we see from the encounter between Jesus and the woman at the well some really important points that we need to meditate on and think about. Let me read to you a portion of that passage, and it's in John chapter 4. We've been dealing with this for several weeks now, so if you have not been following us, I want to encourage you to go back and watch the previous episodes so you can see what we have said so far. But here is Jesus on his way to Galilee. He leaves Jerusalem and he has to go through Samaria, and by the most direct route. He gets to a well. It's in the town called Sychar. He's tired. He's thirsty. His disciples go off to go and buy food. He sits by the well. This woman comes out to draw water. He asks her to give him water. She's surprised because he's a Jew, and he asks her, a Samaritan, for water. And a conversation begins. The conversation brings her to the point where she realizes that Jesus may be the Messiah. His disciples come back and they find him talking to a woman, and they're astonished. Let's take it from there. Meanwhile, his disciples urged him, saying, "Rabbi, eat something." But he assured them, "I have food to eat of which you know nothing and have no idea, of which you know nothing and have no idea." So the disciples said one to another, "Has someone brought him something to eat?" Jesus said to them, "My food, nourishment, is to do the pleasure of him who sent me and to accomplish and completely finish his work. Do you not say, it is still 4 months and until harvest time comes? Look, I tell you, raise your eyes and observe the fields and see how they are already white for harvesting." Now, this is a very powerful passage because the disciples want to get him to eat, but Jesus does not want to eat. We started discussing this the last time, and he tells them that, "No, I have food to eat of that you know nothing about." And we've been discussing the value of the harvest. The fact that Jesus is engaged in conversation with this woman. He brings her to the knowledge of who he is as the Messiah. He goes to get other people and he's satisfied. He's fully satisfied with that encounter. He forgets about his natural needs. And so the first thing we're looking at thus here is to see just how satisfying it is to do the will of the Father. And this, of course, relates to what we said the last time. Yes, absolutely. Jesus says in 3 months' time, you say, let me go over it again. You say it's still 4 months until harvest time comes. Absolutely. So what we see here is a difference of perspective, a difference of vision, a difference of understanding. It's Jesus is saying, okay, this is what you say. This is how you see things. But I am telling you that it's not the way you think it is. So indeed, the first thing when it comes to the harvest, that's an excellent question. The first thing when it comes to the harvest is that we change the way we see. We change the way we think. We change our perspective. We are all creatures of our environment, of our education, our generation. It all depends on how you were raised as a believer. There are some people who were raised in very evangelistic environments, and they have this whole thing about winning the lost and reaching out to those who do not know the Lord. It's part and parcel of their psyche. There are other people who are raised in more teaching type environments, and they know that yes, they should preach the gospel, but they don't quite see that way. Other people were raised in environments where they feel, well, you know what, like someone was said to a very famous missionary, we discussed this here before he became a famous missionary, when God gets ready to save the heathen, he will do so. He doesn't need you. So we have different perspectives in the body of Christ, and whatever our perspective is, the important thing is that we respond to Jesus. We look up. See, in another translation, it says, look up, and the fields are white unto harvest. Look up, because there is something that you are not seeing that you should be seeing. So indeed, this passage is Jesus drawing his disciples to change their perspective. And it's Jesus telling us to change our perspective. The truth of the matter is that in most of the church today, we really need to change our perspective. And perhaps in times past, indeed in times past, in many, many circles, people were more evangelistic and they had this greater consciousness that people are being lost and we need to reach out to them. But in our age, even when we do evangelism, we do it as a commandment. We're supposed to evangelize, or we want to grow the church, so we go out and preach the gospel and invite our friends, or perhaps we do because they have problems and we know that Jesus will solve their problems. And so sometimes our evangelism is not motivated by a hunger and a passion to win the lost, to save them from eternal damnation and separation from God. It's more like we need to grow the church, so we evangelize. We need to show that we also are bringing people, so we evangelize. All people have problems and we want to help them to solve their temporal problems. And indeed, very often today, we're more focused on solving people's temporal problems than in solving their eternal problems. The problems linked to their eternal destination, to their relationship with God or their lack thereof. Problems related to the wrath of God that is upon the lives of the unbelievers. Those things seem to motivate us less than the desire to help them to solve their temporal problems. So this guy drinks, I'll invite him to church so Jesus can save him from drinking. This fellow is sick, I'll invite him to church so Jesus can heal his body. This person needs to get married, he hasn't found a wife, so we'll take him to church. There are many girls in church, they can get saved and also get a wife. We're focused on solving people's temporal problems. And when we are not, it's often a question of, people that are not open, people don't want to receive. So I'm just putting forward different things that we say about the harvest. People are not open to receive. In France, les gens sont hostiles, and that's French for people are hostile. Les gens sont hostiles, ils aiment pas, ils veulent pas. And I've lived in this country for 30 years thereabouts, and I've heard that all that time. I've heard people say, oui, mais en France, les gens n'aiment pas. And it's like, in France, people don't like the gospel, they're not open. And so, but Jesus is saying something else. And I want to challenge you today. I know what country you live in. You may live in the United Kingdom. This is a program in English, so we're broadcasting in the English-speaking world. You may live in the United Kingdom. You may live in the United States, and you may think people are not open to the gospel. They are hostile. But one of the things I say is that the greatest problem that God has is not the unbelief of the unbelievers, it's the unbelief of the believers. Because insofar as we believe that people are not open, that the harvest is difficult, that people will not listen, we don't go. And when we don't go, God cannot save them, even though Jesus has gone to the cross. Isn't that amazing? He speaks through a human being on the earth today. So, yes, Jesus then says, look up. The fields are wide for the harvest. Look up, see, look around you. Look, it's not what you think. It's not, people are not hostile. People are not rejecting the gospel. No, they are not hearing the gospel. They are not seeing the gospel demonstrated in practical terms. They're not seeing what the people in the times of the apostles saw. They're not seeing signs and wonders that validate the veracity of what we preach. And it still needs to be validated today. People will respond if you preach and if you demonstrate. Not everybody will, but some people will. So Jesus wants to change our perspective. And I want to encourage you today. He says, I wrote here, it's an invitation to vision, to transformation of perspective. It's an invitation to surrender your opinions and let God show you. It's an invitation to the renewing of the mind. He says the harvest is plentiful. He says the fields are white for harvest. That's what Jesus says. In Matthew 9, he says the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. In other words, it's not the people who are not saved. It's the people who are not doing their job, who don't see right, who don't believe right, who don't think right, and who don't act right. And that's why people are not saved. That's why the harvest is still out there, because those who have come to the Lord have the wrong perspective and the wrong attitude. So that answers that question. Yes, that is a great question. John Song, what was his perspective of this? Can I say that he's someone whose eyes were open to see? I believe so. I talked about John Song in the last episode. He was a Chinese, a great Chinese evangelist from the last century, and he is reputed to have, out of 1 million Chinese Christians, brought about 100,000 to the Lord at the time. That was a long time ago. He was born in 1901. And this man had all the highest honors. I'm just reminding us of who he was for those who didn't follow us last week. He had all the highest academic honors, having studied in America, which was a novelty at the time, and was expected to take up a high position in government, in civil service, in the hospital sector. But he came home and became a preacher because of the astounding experience he had had with the Lord in the U.S. Now, what would I say about his perspective of the harvest? Yes, I would say that he is someone who looked up, indeed, and who saw that the fields were wide for harvest. Why would I say that? Because he gave up everything. I talked about him seeing the value of the harvest the last time. Remember that he threw all his degrees overboard, except for his doctoral degree, which he wanted to give to his father. He threw everything overboard on the boat back to China because he saw that the fields were white for harvest. He saw this vast country of China, and he knew that he had to devote his life. He always apparently felt he would die young. I don't know why he thought that, but he felt that whatever life he had to live, he must devote to gathering in the harvest. I will bless God for men like him, because his labors had a major impact on the nation of China and on helping Christians to weather the terrible storm of the Cultural Revolution. So that's another point. When we talk about the fields being white for harvest, it's being able to identify times and seasons and knowing when we should rush in and do something very quickly and not let the harvest rot in the fields. And in his case, the work he did before China was shut off and things changed radically really helped to avoid the harvest rotting in the fields. So that is one person who did see God's perspective. And I also told a story about a dream or vision that he had about himself lying in a coffin. Well, I won't go into all that. Watch the previous episode. You'll find out what that story was about. Really interesting. That was God opening his eyes to see that the fields were white for harvest. And when he remembered that his parents were not happy that he decided to become a preacher, even though his father was a pastor and had been so for almost 40 years at the time, if not more, because they just thought this is a life of poverty, this is a life of sorrow. But he saw something that people of his generation may not have seen, that his parents didn't see. He saw the fields that were white for harvest. And honestly, when you would open your eyes and let the Lord show you what he is seeing, your perspective will change as well. And we need that. We need a change in perspective. Speaking of times and seasons, think of this season we are in. We're coming out of, I believe, a pandemic season. And even though it's still raging in many parts of the world, but the fields are white for harvest right now. It's time for us to launch in there with the gospel and preach. People are destabilized. You know, our president here in France may be making a speech in the next few days, but he was expected last week to impose a third lockdown, and that has happened in some European countries. And he decided not to. Do you know why? Because of mental health issues. The government is concerned about people that they cannot mentally handle a third lockdown, that being locked in their homes and being impeded from going out would affect many people mentally. Many doctors have come up to say that people are not handling this very well. So it shows how destabilized many people are right now. The fields are white for harvest. And that many are asking questions and saying, is this all there is to life? And it's time for the church to rise up and preach the gospel and stop being obsessed about our own selves. And, one of the things we were saying, I'm saying a lot of things, when I was teaching this in our church was that Many believers are not seeing the fields ripe for harvest. All they are seeing is their own convenience. Many of them have discovered that, oh, actually, I can consume Jesus on the internet, and I don't have to be in a local church. I don't have to serve. That, of course, is not true, but that is a lie that the devil is putting into people's minds to weaken the church and to hinder the work of evangelism, because it's done with people. And when we're not disciples, we cannot make disciples. So that's just, yes, he's a man who saw that the fields were white for harvest. And I pray that each and every one of us will also see what he saw. Excellent question. What does the harvest entail? It entails a lot more than we think sometimes. Think of our perspective of the harvest. Most of us are not farmers at all, not in the least, And even when we are farmers, we are these casual gentleman farmers, or who just have little plots on the weekend and they go there to unwind. And some people have gardens in their homes and stuff like that. I am not a farmer. I mean, back in the day, I used to say that I lived in this apartment close to the center of Paris. And I would have plants and they would always die. And then I decided I'm going to get cacti. Cacti can weather any adversity. And the cacti would die. So, I make no claims whatsoever to any form of expertise in farming, but this much I know. And this much you should know. Harvest, whatever I said entails work. Jesus told us that the harvest is plentiful. He told the disciples in this passage, John 4, that they should look up. The fields were white unto harvest. Now, the fields are white unto harvest. That is wonderful. It means that, we can go out there and begin to harvest. But do you know that it takes implements, it takes tools, it takes energy to harvest? And at the time, it was not about tractors or whatever machines people use these days for harvest. Even then, somebody still has to drive that thing. But it was manual harvesting. People had to go in there and they need to cut all that stuff. And then you had the poor people who would come behind and pick up whatever was left in the fields. And it was back-breaking work. Harvest is work. So when Jesus is talking about the harvest, and later on in the passage, he talks about them coming to reap where other people have sown and other people had done the work. So there are different categories of work. There's the work of sowing, there's the work of reaping, and other people had done the work. They were coming to reap. But even the reaping, the harvesting that we're going to do would require work. Now think of this. We are not farmers for the most part, most of us. And when we think of harvest, especially in the church, what are we thinking of? Oh, I sowed a seed, I'm going to reap a harvest. And I sowed and I gave, and the Lord has blessed me, and some money has come and I've reaped a harvest. And we think of the harvest as something that happens to us. It's something that, is done for us. It's something that just comes to us. But when Jesus was speaking about the harvest, and very often we can have the same mindset when it sows. Okay, I've preached, they just show up. They have to show up somewhere. Or, I put a post on the internet. Yes, I'm going to have 5 people show up in church because I put a post on the internet. And that's not the way it works. Of course, your post on the internet can bring 5 people to church, but the harvest, when Jesus talks about it here, is something that requires you to do something consistently. Sometimes it's hard. They would go in there, they would harvest, and then after harvesting, they would bind into sheaves. And after that, they would go and thresh them. And that was a lot of hard work before they would finally obtain the grain that they needed. And there was the threshing, the winnowing, and don't even let me pretend to be an expert on the matter. Just know this, it was a lot of work. And so that is a dimension of the harvest that we need to integrate into our thinking. The idea of working for God, and just write that and underline it. Working for God, working for the purposes of the kingdom. And not only that, but working hard for God. I say this all the time. I would rather exhaust myself in the service of the Messiah than do nothing. Absolutely. It is wonderful for me when I've been working hard for the Lord and I feel tired. I'm like, wow, I've been working for the Lord. Not pride or self-satisfaction, just joy, humility, and a gladness of heart that this life can be of use to the Master. It's an amazing thing. Many of us go to work and we come back in the evening and we're tired. I'm just like, I'm tired. and then we eat, and then we'll turn on the TV mindlessly. Oh, just give me a book. I'm tired. Or you're a young man and your mother says, oh, come on. Oh, mom, I'm tired. Well, we didn't talk like that to our parents in our time. But I know young people do that these days. But when we work for the Lord and we've gone out to win souls, we've been doing stuff online to bring people to Christ and we're tired, it's something that should make us feel joy that we have expended our energy for the kingdom. We have utilized our mental capacity for the purposes of God, that the lost may be found. So the harvest is hard work. That is one aspect of the harvest that we should really keep in mind. And I talked the last time about John Song and how he would, after getting people saved, he would form them into bands of 3, groups of 3, and immediately send them out to their villages to go and preach the gospel. And they would go and they would get people saved and go and get people saved, and they kept on working. And I think that notion of working and working hard so that people will come to the knowledge of Christ needs to come back into our thinking, into our way of relating to the work of the kingdom. Many people would say, oh, I'm working for the Lord. I do this on Sunday, and that's it. And they're so happy because they're serving the Lord. Beloved, let's find things to do that will bring people to Christ and that will entail work, real work, because that is what it takes to get the harvest. Yes, how urgent is this? Very urgent. Jesus said, the fields are all ready. He says, I tell you, raise your eyes and observe the fields and see how they are already white for harvesting. Already the reaper is getting his wages. He who does the cutting now has his reward, for he's gathering fruit unto life eternal, so that he who does the planting, he who does the reaping may rejoice together. So we'll probably take the rest of that passage later. What we see here is Jesus is really pushing us and say, come on, go, 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 go. The harvest is there. It is ready. There is work to be done. Go and bring souls into the kingdom. And when it comes to statistics and how urgent this is, it's urgent because Jesus says it's now. It's now. The reaper, the harvester, the sower, they're going forward together. Go, 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 go and get the people. And when you look at the statistics, I'm going to be giving you a few statistics. I call this from several sources, and it's quite worrying. There is a person who said 70% of evangelical Christians have never been told about the 1.6 billion unevangelized people in the world. And this is a quote from the World Evangelization Research Center. And how are we supposed to take the gospel to the unevangelized if we don't even know about them? 70% of evangelical Christians have never been told about the 1.6 billion. Now, the other estimate I found is about 2 billion people. Let's just say we'll round it up to 2 billion people who've never heard the gospel. And I'm talking about not people who have not responded to the gospel. When we look at those who have not responded and we add them to those who have never heard, we're looking at over 50% of the world's population who are not at all inclined to become Christians, either because they rejected it or they have never heard. Now listen to that. Listen to this. 70% of us evangelical Christians have never even heard that almost 2 billion people on the face of the earth have never heard about Jesus. That is terrifying, especially in the age in which we live, when we have the internet and so many people are on the internet, and when we have jet travel, and in no time at all we can be on the other side of the world. Remember this. I mentioned this once in this program, that Hudson Taylor was in China and he was preaching the gospel. It's one of my favorite mission stories, and he got a young man saved among other people. Thank God. And this young man had been hooked on some kind of drug, and now he was fine. He'd been delivered, and he was asking Hudson Taylor, "In your country, how long have you had the gospel?" And Hudson Taylor told him, and he was shocked, and he said, "What? And you're only now coming to tell us?" Now think about that. What? And you're only now coming to tell us? I mean, this young man encountered Christ. His whole life was changed. And he realized that these people have had the gospel for centuries. And you didn't come to tell us before. Beloved, there are many people today who would say that to you if they could meet you. You're only now coming to tell us. There are people who still have not been told. Can I awaken your consciousness and your conscience to the fact that everything you have received in Christ, you're supposed to give? And that 2 billion people almost on the earth who haven't heard the gospel, that's a massive indictment of the Church of Jesus Christ today. Busy receiving blessings, busy confessing scriptures, busy fighting over theology, busy insulting one another on the internet. Yet, almost 2 billion people have never heard the name of Christ. Let me give you some more statistics. Now, this is, I got this from something called the Joshua Project. And they say that in the world there are 0.78 billion born-again Christians. Okay, 0.78. Not even 1 billion, 780 million. 10% of the world's population, 23% of the world's population, 1.78 billion are nominal Christian adherents. 39%, 3.02 billion. That's their figure for those who have heard and not responded to the gospel. That's huge. That's much more than the number of Christians put together, both born again and nominal Christians. Now, 28%, 2.17 billion, that's their figure, virtually no exposure to Christianity. Now, it says that Christianity is growing at 1.2% per year, but Islam is growing at 1.9% and thus faster than general Christianity. The positive news is that evangelical Christianity is growing at 2.6% and thus faster than Islam. Operation World 2010. That's where that comes from. Now, over 90% of all cross-cultural missionaries labor among nominally Christian people groups, well less than 10% among those who've never heard the gospel. Christians, listen to this. This is very interesting. This is for you and I. Christians make up 33% of the world's population, but receive 53% of the world's annual income and spend 98% of it on themselves. Now, when I see people fighting on the internet over tithing or giving, I just think this is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. That it's too much for us to give 10% of our income to the church for the purposes of furthering the gospel. And some people say, yeah, but I give more than that now that I don't tithe because it affects me. There's something wrong with you. Why should you be bothered by being given a percentage? I mean, the government gives you a percentage and yet you give it. So why is it a problem that there's a percentage in the church that you give of your income? We should be giving more than 10% of our income if we truly care about reaching all these people. And if you're in a church that doesn't care about reaching people, what are you doing there? Now listen to this. The church has roughly 3,000 times the financial resources and 9,000 times the manpower needed to finish the Great Commission. This comes from the traveling team. So we have everything we need in terms of resources. We have enough people. We have enough money. I'm talking about the church globally. Don't write me and say, but our church does not even have a place to meet. No, globally. So there is a problem of perception. Jesus said, look up, see. The fields are white for harvest. There's a problem of perception and there is a problem of laborers. Matthew 9, pray that the Lord of the harvest will send laborers to his harvest. That's talking about you and I. And you know, there is so much more that can be said. I could give you more figures about what is going on in the world today, but there are people who are doing great things. And one of the pieces of information I got was about this movement in India that has over 7,000 congregations and that was born only 4 years ago. So they are winning souls. And one of the earliest movements, 25 years ago, that's some extra information I got for you, among the Bhojpuri language group, and 8 million baptized believers and approximately 200,000 congregations. And they started 25 years ago. So, beloved, there is work to be done and we can do it. Jesus said the fields are white for harvest. It's time to go beyond personal blessing. It's time to become a blessing to your generation. And there are many people where the gospel, many places where the gospel has not been preached. But there are places where you and I live today where a generation is arising and growing to adulthood that has never heard the gospel. I can tell you, on the streets of France, young people, for the most part, have never heard the gospel. So if you live in Europe, you can think of India and think of parts of Africa, but Africa is more evangelized today in relative terms than Europe is. And so let's allow God to speak to our hearts and say, in this year, I have a new perspective. I have a new occupation. I choose to become a soul winner. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. And I'll see you next week. Shalom. I pray for you that the word of God will come alive in your heart. I pray for you that zeal for his house will consume you. I pray for you. God built into me such a passion for his person. It's one of the greatest gifts that I have received from heaven. And it's one of the major things that people say, wow, you're so passionate. I don't try to be passionate. But I cannot read this book. I don't get excited about Jesus.